Sziasztok, Kristóf vagyok.
Hi everyone, today we're going to build this 60p aquarium using around 10 kilos of hardscape. This would usually go into a 120p, but we're making it work in a 60. So, stay with me.
Tartsatok velem. Ez most egy kicsit rendhagyó építkezés lesz.
This build is going to be a bit unconventional. We're completely going against the usual order of construction, where you'd start with the substrate, then add hardscape, and the plants at the very end. As you can see, our hardscape is already pre-assembled. This was partly for practical reasons, and partly because, given their size and the lack of time, we would not have had time to glue these larger pieces here with Impa glue. The workflow will look like this. First, we'll plant this large piece of wood you see here. Once that's done, we'll take it out, build the substrate and stone layout in the aquarium, and then place the planted wood back in.
Majd egybe fogjuk olvasztani a kettőt. Fogjuk használni a normál, hagyományos.
Inside the aquarium, we'll use standard aquatic plants. But the upper section won't just be left hanging in the air, that part will also be planted. However, instead of classic aquatic plants, we'll use houseplants that tolerate wet conditions well, such as pothos, aquatic palms, and peace lilies. This way, we'll have plants both inside and outside the tank, all functioning together as one system. When it comes to filtration, we had to move away from the usual intake-outflow setup. There simply isn't enough space, and we also need to supply water to the houseplants. So somewhere in this area, we'll install a plastic pipe that pumps water upward from below. At first glance, it looks complex, but it's only 4 main wood pieces. The large base piece is down here. On top of that, there are 2 glued pieces, and then 1 smaller section added here. Everything else consists of smaller details, which we'll fine-tune later to get the look just right. The same applies to the stones. These 3 or 4 visible rocks are our main stones. They provide structure and stability, which is important because there's quite a bit of weight involved. Later in the build, we'll refine the layout with smaller stones to add more detail and depth.
Még a későbbiekben a vége fele.
As a starting point, we know that aquatic plants don't need much, mainly just water. Of course, the quality of that water matters. For the houseplants, however, simply letting water run over them isn't enough. That's why we'll be using a material called Hygrolon. Hygrolon works based on capillary action. If it receives water from below, it can easily draw moisture upward, even 15 to 20 centimeters, ensuring that the plants above stay properly hydrated. So the basic idea is that somewhere around here, we'll place the pump's outlet pipe at about this height. From there, the water will flow down to the water level, but ideally, we also want water to reach this line here, and this upper line as well. So we'll start installing the Hygrolon somewhere in this area and build it up gradually. We don't actually glue the Hygrolon in place because it works based on capillary action. Any kind of liquid glue would soak into the capillaries and block them. If that happens, the material would lose its ability to draw water upward. In terrariums, for example, it's often fixed with staples or clips instead. Because Hygrolon has a porous structure, cable ties can also pass through it very easily, which makes it simple to secure. Nowadays, you can see a lot of aquascapes online where people use oversized hardscape elements and let plants grow out beyond the tank, sometimes even larger than what would normally suit the aquarium's size. That's where a lot of the inspiration came from. I like expanding the sense of space, so with a clear concept, it was quick to build. At this point, our Hygrolon base is basically ready, which means we can start adding plants. We'll secure them using Terra tape as we go. These are houseplants bought from a garden center. We washed off as much soil as possible, although you can still see a few small remnants. Those will be rinsed off properly and sprayed down. What you're seeing here is a peace lily, which is an extremely easy, almost indestructible houseplant. It can grow quite large over time. In many ways, it's similar to Anubias, both in terms of leaf shape and even the flower. It works very well as a main plant and provides excellent coverage. It's a good idea to trim the roots slightly since they tend to be very long. As long as you leave the main root system intact and only remove a small portion, the plant won't be harmed at all. We'll loosely tie them in place right away using Terra tape, always anchoring the tape somewhere so it doesn't slide back. As more plants are added, multiple layers of Terra tape will naturally build up.
Egyébként nagyon jó anyag ez.
It stretches easily so that you can tension things properly. It's simple to cut and you don't need to glue or knot it. It grips even in the smallest cracks and basically sticks to itself. For now, we'll just wrap it enough so everything stays in place. This is our first plant. It's worth keeping a consistent pattern in mind. Since the whole scape is already tapering upward, placing the larger plants higher up, making the entire structure feel taller and more monumental. We made the mistake of tangling the Terra tape together already, so now we have to play around with it a bit. It would honestly be easier just to cut it and work with smaller pieces, but where's the fun in that? At least it stretches really nicely. Let's move on and add another peace lily. After that, I won't add any more of these for now, and we'll start bringing in a few plants from the other species as well. Our next group of plants is these lily sedge type species. It's important not to cut the roots too much. As you can see, they don't really have traditional roots. Instead, they have small bulb-like structures that store nutrients. If possible, we should leave those intact. They play an important role in the plant's development, and the plant is quite sensitive if they're removed. It's worth paying attention not to bend or crease the leaves because the plant doesn't tolerate that very well. Unfortunately, if a leaf does get damaged, it will most likely be shed later on. Here you can see that the roots of each plant are in contact with the Hygrolon, so they'll all have a proper water supply. With this scape, we can't mount a light on the aquarium in the traditional way by placing it on the rim, so it definitely has to be suspended above it. Most lights generate heat, which means there's a risk that the plants could dry out. Because of that, it's important to have a reliable water supply, and it also helps to raise the light high enough above the setup. For the lower section, I planned the planting around easy low-light species rather than demanding plants. Things like Anubias, Microsorum, and Bucephalandra. This way, even if less light reaches the bottom, they'll do perfectly fine and won't cause any issues for the aquarium at all.
Ők baromi jól el lesznek vele, és nem fog gondot okozni az akváriumnak egyáltalán.
It's also very important to know that these plants, whether they're houseplants, garden plants, or any other non-aquatic plants used in an aquarium, have a much higher nutrient uptake than typical aquatic plants. Because of that, it's a good idea to increase fertilization, either by adding extra nutrients locally around the plants, or by using a stronger, more complex fertilizer overall. We still have a few plants left to add. One of them is a very well-known, almost retro classic, pothos. It absolutely loves having its roots in water, and because it's a trailing plant, we should give it enough space to grow and spread freely in all directions. We also have some Phytonias. These are very often sold in pet shops as aquatic plants. However, it's important to know that none of these will survive fully submerged in the long run. You'll see them quite often in stores, and they may look fine for a while, but they eventually decline because they're marsh plants, not true aquatic species. I also saved a bit of Hygrolon for this section here, and now it's time to use it. There won't be an outflow here, so it's a good idea to dip the bottom slightly into the water to make sure it can absorb moisture properly. Our next plant will be a parlor palm, another very easy houseplant. I'm placing it a bit further back for now. It's still quite small, so it won't be very visible yet. But once it grows, it can easily produce leaves close to 1 meter long, and it will eventually peak somewhere around here.
De vannak ezek a kis különleges.
We also have these small, more unusual plants that will add a nice pinkish tone to the scape. There's still a bit of soil left on them. I washed off as much as possible, but it's worth expecting that when we first fill the aquarium with water, it won't be crystal clear right away. We'll need to give it a few days so the filter can catch those remaining fine soil particles. We'll now cover up these less attractive areas where the root system is still very visible and the Terra tape is a bit exposed. Using gentle, careful movements, we'll wrap everything up neatly with one final layer of Terra tape. All right, one side is now nicely covered. At this point, most of our houseplants are already in place. What you can see here are plants that we also sell specifically for terrarium use. This one is called Kyoto. This is a japonica variety. Over here we have different Aquarius species, including Aquarius pusillus, which is a smaller grass-like plant. These are also very easy to work with. They all need to be kept wet, but of course not fully submerged. Here we have the portobello. This is Nummularia gold. It's another very easy to keep trailing or creeping plant. You can see that small pockets have formed here, which hold the plants quite securely. But if I want to add more plants later, I can simply pull the whole structure slightly, very gently, and tuck the roots in carefully right here. Once the Nummularia grows larger, it will start trailing downward as well. It can even hang into the water and spread all around, climbing over the structure. At this stage, the upper section is starting to take on its final look. Later on, we'll fine-tune the details with the other aquatic plants, so it doesn't end up being just one big crown on top with only a few plants below. This part is close enough to the water, so Hygrolon isn't needed. Now we can move on to the main part, the actual underwater section. Our lighting will be positioned somewhere around here, so these plants will block a fair amount of the light. Because of that, we're choosing easy-to-keep species that do well under lower light conditions. The typical epiphytes, very easy to keep and low-light plants, are mainly Microsorum species. We have smaller varieties like green gnome, slightly larger ones like narrow, and the largest ones here are Terrapis. In addition to that, I'm also using Bucephalandra, green velvet, Kedagang to add a bit of layering to the layout, and blue-green as well. And of course, the most typical and easiest to keep aquarium plants are the Anubias species. Since the hardscape is basically finished at this point, we'll attach the plants using gel-type glue. First, we'll start with the larger pieces, in this case, Microsorum terrapis. We apply a small amount of glue and carefully fix them into position. I'm placing these plants here to help compensate for this gap. These plants can actually grow up above the water surface quite nicely, and they remain healthy and viable. They can even flower in these conditions. The next, slightly smaller category is Microsorum terrapis narrow, and it's best to place these in front of the larger plants so we can play with proportions and depth. Then we can move on to the larger Anubias species like the Nana. When attaching Anubias, it's important not to glue the rhizome itself, but rather the finer, softer root strands. Those will be enough to hold the plant in place. If we were to glue the rhizome itself, the glue would slowly damage the plant and cause it to break down over time. Now we're going to lift this whole structure out. The aquarium will go back to its original position. I'll add the sand, arrange the stones, place the hardscape back on top, and then glue everything together. I'm not really planning to plant much directly into the substrate, maybe just a few Cryptocoryne species at most, so sand will work perfectly fine here. I'll be using La Plata Sand, 8 kilos in total, and we'll probably use all of it. Now that the substrate is in, I can put the stones back where they were. At this point, the most important thing is to glue the remaining plants and hardscape together so everything stays where it's supposed to. That said, because of the weight, the structure would more or less stay in place anyway. The hardscape is still wet, so we can move on with the remaining plants, starting with the Bucephalandras. These are pinnatifida plants. I'm not going to split them up because they're already quite thin, and I'd like them to grow together as a clump, so I'll simply place them into the cracks as they are. These 2 or 3 pots will be spread out nicely this way. There's still some open space left in the substrate, but I don't really want to plant it heavily. The main focus is on the wood and epiphytes, so I'll only add 1 or 2 Cryptocorynes. One of the most important steps now is inserting this small plastic fitting right into the center here. When I originally assembled the hardscape, I intentionally left a small groove for it so we can slide it in and connect it to our EHEIM external filter. This will be connected to the outlet side, so we'll have a normal intake with a skimmer, and instead of a lily pipe on the outlet, the water will be returned to the aquarium through this fitting, releasing it back in from the top. All right, it's in. Now that everything is in place, as a final step, let's fill the aquarium, start the filter, and see what we've created. We're now about a month past the build, and it looks like the aquarium is working. And more importantly, it looks like it will work long term. The plants are clearly growing, producing more and more new side shoots. The pothos has started to take off nicely as well, and we can see new leaves appearing everywhere. The peace lily has also begun to grow, producing new leaves and even flowers. Overall, it seems the plants are responding well to the lighting, and the water they need is reaching every part of the setup evenly, which prevents them from drying out. Because of that, I'd consider this build a success. It looks like the combination of Hygrolon and TerraTape worked exactly as intended in terms of water distribution. As you can see, we ended up using 2 lights on this aquarium. One of the reasons for that is simply the number of plants we have here. The main light is suspended above the setup, but as it turned out, not enough light was reaching the lower region. So just to be safe, we added a second light. This way the lower part of the aquarium is properly illuminated, and the houseplants on top are also receiving enough light to stay healthy. The plants in the underwater section aren't showing any signs of light deficiency either. So in the end, using 2 lights solved the problem perfectly. We also tested how this whole waterfall style system would work. For the first few days, we had to fine-tune it a bit to avoid splashing water out of the aquarium, because at first there was some dripping from the wood on the sides. We ended up slightly reducing the output of the EHEIM filter, and after that it worked without any issues. Luckily, the filter is powerful enough to handle the height and distance. Actually, it was too strong at first, but once we dialed it back a bit, it worked perfectly.
Ez is megállta a helyét, és semmilyen gond nem volt vele. As you can see, the water is continuously dripping down, so it didn't really make sense to inject carbon dioxide into this system. As the water cascades down, it immediately drives the gas out, meaning we'd just be adding it unnecessarily. Fortunately, The plants we're using here are simple, undemanding species that don't require carbon dioxide for healthy growth. In the meantime, we've also added the livestock, Autosynclus, a mono shrimp, and my personal favorite, the flame tetra, a real retro classic fish and one of my all-time favorites. A red striped fish looks absolutely fantastic against all this green. There's very little flow here, creating a calm, marsh-like feel. Of course, if you prefer, you can add circulation pumps and create a stronger flow, similar to what we usually do in the gallery setups. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out our other 60p builds in this playlist. See you next time. Goodbye.
Sziasztok!